Mark had been working late into the night again. The soft hum of his power tools had finally quieted, and the only light left in the neighborhood came from a few street lamps casting long shadows across the quiet street. His garage was cluttered, with half-finished projects, paint cans, and tools strewn about, but tonight's task was complete. With a satisfied sigh, he pushed the workbench back into place and started tidying up. He reached for the garage door remote, intending to close it fully before heading inside the house. But in the rush to finish, Mark didn't notice that the garage door had only come down part way. The bottom gap was wide enough to see inside, a sliver of dim light from the porch lamp spilling out onto the driveway. Across the street, Karen sat on her porch swing, sipping iced tea after a long day. The warm evening breeze rustled the leaves, and she enjoyed the calm of the neighborhood. Her eyes wandered casually to the row of houses, each with their soft yellow porch lights glowing. Then something caught her attention. Mark's garage door was open. Karen squinted, her brow furrowing as she noticed a shadow moving inside the garage. The figure bent over something, and the way the light flickered made it seem mysterious, almost suspicious. Her mind instantly jumped to her own driveway, her brand-new car, the sleek black sedan she had purchased just last week. She had proudly told neighbors about it, pointing out every detail from the leather seats to the fancy touchscreen console. That car was her prized possession, a symbol of her hard work and the success she liked to showcase. The thought of someone sneaking into a garage on their block at night made her stomach twist. She knew the neighborhood was usually quiet and safe, but stories from the news about break-ins and thefts in nearby areas made her wary. Karen put down her glass, stood up, and stepped off the porch to get a closer look. Her heart pounded just a little faster as she moved across the street. From where she stood, the garage light flickered just enough to reveal a figure moving inside. The shadowy silhouette bent low, reaching toward a car. It had to be her car. Right? She took out her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was calm but firm as she reported what she saw. "There's someone in my neighbor's garage. I think they're stealing my new car. Please send help right away." While she spoke, she scanned the street for other neighbors, but the quiet homes showed no signs of activity. The dispatcher asked questions: location, description, whether the suspect was armed. Karen answered confidently, describing the dark shape she'd seen. The officers promised they were on their way. As she waited, Karen's mind raced. She replayed the last few days in her head: the car's arrival, the joy of parking it in her driveway, the conversations she'd had showing it off. It couldn't be stolen now. Not here. Not by someone from her own street. Back at Mark's house, he was completely unaware of the growing tension. He stepped inside his garage to grab one last tool and noticed the door was slightly raised. Frowning, he pushed the remote button again, but the door didn't close all the way. Probably just a glitch, he thought. He figured he'd fix it in the morning. At that moment, the flashing red and blue lights appeared down the street. Mark's eyebrows raised in surprise as two police cars pulled up in front of his driveway. Officers jumped out, flashlights cutting through the night. Karen, standing nearby but safely across the street, felt a mixture of relief and vindication. The police were here, ready to handle the thief in her midst. Mark, however, was about to be caught off guard in a way he hadn't expected. Karen's heart was pounding as she stood on the edge of the sidewalk, watching the flashing police lights reflect off the houses around her. The officers moved quickly, their flashlights slicing through the shadows of the garage. She told herself she was doing the right thing. After all, she had seen someone in what she was certain was her garage. And that car inside, her beautiful new black sedan, had to be hers. Who else's could it be? The years she'd spent making sure her property was protected flooded her thoughts. She'd attended every meeting, pushed for security cameras, and kept a close eye on the neighborhood. She wasn't about to let some stranger drive off with her car, especially not in broad daylight's shadow of night. Her phone was still in her hand. She had been so sure about what she saw. The figure moving around the car had seemed to fit the description of a thief she'd imagined in her head. Someone sneaky, unfamiliar, out of place. She had been worried enough to act immediately, but now, as she observed the scene from across the street, doubt flickered briefly in her mind. The man was talking calmly with the officers. He looked more like a neighbor than a criminal. But no, Karen shook her head. There were plenty of neighbors she barely knew. Could this be one of them? Or someone casing the area? Meanwhile, Mark stood near the open garage, hands raised slightly in a gesture of calm as the officers approached. His eyes met their flashlights not with fear, but confusion. "Good evening, officers," he said. "Is there a problem?" One of the officers, a woman with a kind but firm voice, replied, "We received a call about a possible car theft here. Someone reported a suspicious person in your garage." Mark blinked in surprise. "That's me. I was just finishing up a project in here and must have left the garage door open. This is my house and my car." The officers glanced at each other, then turned back to Mark. "Can you show us some ID?" Mark nodded and pulled out his driver's license. As the officers checked his information on their radios, Karen's gaze hardened. She wasn't ready to back down yet. Not until she knew her car was safe. Nearby, neighbors began to peek out from their windows, curiosity piqued by the flashing lights and low voices. A few gathered quietly on the sidewalks, whispering to each other. Karen stepped closer to the officers, her voice steady but insistent. "That's not his car. I know my car. That black sedan belongs to me. I just bought it last week." One of the officers nodded, but the other asked gently, "Are you sure the car is the same one you have?" Karen lifted her chin, confident. "Absolutely. The make, model, everything. That's my car." Mark watched the exchange, a mixture of frustration and disbelief growing inside him. He loved his car and took great care of it, but it wasn't Karen's. They weren't even the same model. Trying to clear the misunderstanding, he said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry if there's been confusion. That car is mine, and I've lived here for 5 years. I think you might have mistaken me for someone else." Karen's eyes narrowed, unwilling to give up her certainty. "I've lived here for years too, but this car is new. I know my own vehicle." One of the officers stepped between them, raising a hand to ease the tension. "Let's take a breath here. We're just making sure everything's okay." The scene felt like it was frozen in time. Karen's suspicion and Mark's frustration hung in the air, the quiet neighborhood holding its breath. Suddenly, a neighbor stepped forward, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. "Hey, Karen," he said gently. "That's Mark's car, not yours. I saw him working in the garage earlier." Karen hesitated, then looked toward Mark, whose expression softened slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased a little. The officers nodded and began packing up, their radios clicking with final confirmations. Karen watched, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief. She had acted out of concern, but maybe this time she had jumped the gun. Mark closed the garage door all the way and turned to Karen, offering a polite nod. "No hard feelings. I understand wanting to keep the neighborhood safe." Karen nodded back, the adrenaline slowly leaving her system. "Yeah, I guess I got a little carried away." As the police cars pulled away, the neighbors began to drift back inside, and the night returned to its quiet stillness. But the story was far from over. The moment Karen saw the garage door slightly raised and the shadowy figure inside, her mind snapped into action. Without a second thought, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. Her fingers trembled just a little as she pressed the call button, but her voice was calm and clear when the dispatcher answered. "There's someone in my neighbor's garage," Karen said, her tone steady but urgent. "I think they're stealing my new car. It's a black sedan, a brand new model. Please send help right away." The dispatcher's voice was professional and soothing, asking for details. Karen gave her address and described the suspicious figure as best she could. A person bent over the car, moving quickly and deliberately. "Is the suspect still there?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," Karen replied, her eyes locked on the garage, watching the figure. "They're still inside." As Karen spoke, she glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed. The street was quiet, the neighbors seemingly asleep or unaware. Her heart pounded. She imagined the thief sneaking away with her car, the shiny, black paint gleaming under the streetlights as it disappeared down the road. The thought made her hands clench. While waiting for the police to arrive, Karen kept her eyes fixed on the garage. The shadow moved slowly, bending and straightening. To her, it was clear proof that someone was tampering with the car. She told herself she was protecting her investment, safeguarding the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Mark was completely unaware that he was the cause of this growing tension. He had stayed a little longer to clean up the tools, making sure everything was in place before calling it a night. When the door suddenly buzzed as it started to close but stopped halfway, he thought it was a minor malfunction. He figured he'd fix it in the morning. Suddenly, the wail of sirens cut through the silence. Karen's heart leapt with relief and pride. The police were on their way. Mark heard the sirens too and stepped outside just as the first patrol car pulled up in front of his driveway. 2 officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the dim night. "Good evening, sir," one officer said as they approached Mark. "We got a call about a possible car theft here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Mark blinked, surprised. Sure. I was working in the garage and I must have left the door open. This is my house and my car." The officers shone their flashlights around, inspecting the car and the garage. Karen, still standing across the street, watched intently. Her grip on her phone tightened. One officer asked Mark for his ID. As he handed it over, Karen's mind raced. What if she was wrong? But no, she had seen the figure clearly. She was certain. The officers spoke quietly to each other, then back to Mark. "Do you know if anyone else has access to your garage or car?" Mark shook his head. "No, just me." Karen stepped closer, her voice firm but controlled. "That's not his car," she said. "That's mine. I bought it just last week." The officers looked at the car again. They exchanged glances but didn't say much. The tension between Karen and Mark was palpable. A small crowd of neighbors began to gather nearby, curious about the flashing lights and quiet commotion. Whispers floated on the breeze. Some wondered what was happening. Others exchanged knowing looks. Karen kept explaining her side, describing the car in detail, insisting it was hers. Mark remained patient, trying to clarify the misunderstanding, without making the situation worse. The officers decided to take statements from both sides, trying to piece together what had really happened. As the night stretched on, Karen felt a mixture of vindication and uncertainty. She had acted quickly, maybe too quickly, but she knew she had tried to protect what was hers. Mark, meanwhile, felt frustrated. He had been minding his own business, and now found himself under suspicion. The flashing lights slowly dimmed, as the officers wrapped up their visit, promising to follow up if needed. Karen returned to her porch, phone still in hand, her thoughts spinning. Had she done the right thing? Was her vigilance appreciated? Or had she caused unnecessary drama? Mark closed his garage door fully this time, locking it with care. As he headed inside, he wondered what the next day would bring. The night seemed peaceful again, but the events were just the beginning of a story that would ripple through their quiet street. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness, like a beacon, pulling the sleepy neighborhood into sharp focus. Mark stood at the edge of his driveway, hands slightly raised as the police officers approached. The sudden attention startled him, but he kept his composure. After all, he had nothing to hide. "Good evening, sir," said the taller of the two. officers, a man with a calm but authoritative voice. "We received a call about a possible theft in progress here. Can you tell us what's going on?" Mark nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was working on a project in the garage, and I must have left the door open. The car belongs to me. I live here." The officers trained their flashlights on the black sedan parked inside the garage. The car gleamed under the porch light, every inch spotless and untouched. One officer moved closer to inspect the garage door, which was still partially open. Karen, standing a few steps away across the street, watched intently. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes sharp. She was convinced she had caught a thief in the act. One of the officers asked Mark for his ID and proof of ownership. Mark fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his driver's license, then grabbed the registration from the glove compartment. As he handed them over, he noticed Karen's gaze on the car, unwavering and intense. "We'll need to verify this," the officer said as he spoke into his radio, relaying the information. "Back to dispatch." Karen stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "That's not his car, that's my car. I bought it just last week." Mark blinked, surprised by her insistence. "I'm sorry, but this is my car. I've had it for years." Karen shook her head. "No, it's definitely mine. The make, model, color, it matches perfectly." The officers exchanged a glance but remained professional. One officer gestured for Karen to take a step back. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. We'll get this sorted out," he said. Karen's jaw tightened, but she nodded and moved back, still watching closely. Meanwhile, a few neighbors had gathered, along the sidewalks drawn by the flashing lights and quiet tension. Some whispered quietly, exchanging curious glances. Others watched with mild amusement, sensing the drama unfolding. Mark sighed quietly, wishing this situation could have been avoided. "I'm happy to show you the paperwork if that helps," he said. One officer nodded and pulled out a flashlight, scanning the documents. After a moment, he spoke into his radio again, confirming the information. The tension began to ease slightly. Karen crossed her arms but didn't say much. Her eyes flicked between Mark and the officers. After a few minutes, the taller officer lowered his flashlight and nodded. "Everything checks out. This is your property." Mark nodded gratefully. "Thank you." Karen's expression softened, but there was still a trace of stubbornness. "I'm just trying to keep the neighborhood safe." The officer smiled slightly. "We understand. It's good to be cautious, but it's also important to be sure before calling." Karen gave a small, reluctant nod. As the officers finished up, one of them turned to Mark. "You might want to double-check your garage door. Leaving it open could cause misunderstandings." Mark chuckled lightly. "Yeah, lesson learned." The officers packed up and started toward their cars. Karen lingered a moment longer, then turned back toward her house, her mind still spinning. Mark closed the garage door fully this time, making sure it latched. He looked back toward Karen's house and gave a small nod. As the police cars pulled away, the neighborhood began to settle again. But the story was far from over. The night returned to its usual calm, but the events that had just unfolded were far from forgotten. The flashing lights and murmured conversations lingered in the air like an aftertaste. Karen sat back on her porch, nursing a cup of tea she barely touched. Her mind replayed the scene again and again, the shadow in the garage, the quick call to the police, the officer's arrival. She still felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Had she done the right thing? The officers confirmed the car belonged to Mark, but what if she had been wrong? What if the situation had been different? Across the street, Mark returned to his home with a tired sigh. He was relieved the police had left, but the weight of suspicion still pressed down on him. He had always kept to himself, enjoying his projects and quiet nights. Now, the neighborhood seemed to be watching him differently. By morning, whispers had already begun to ripple through the streets. Word of the police visit spread quickly, turning a quiet night into the talk of the neighborhood. Neighbors exchanged versions of the story as they passed each other on morning walks or stopped by mailboxes. Some praised Karen's vigilance, admiring her quick action and dedication to safety. "Better safe than sorry," one neighbor said, nodding firmly. Others wondered if the call had been an overreaction. "Maybe she jumped the gun," another whispered, shaking her head. A few raised eyebrows at the idea that Mark's innocent project had caused such a stir. Mark's phone buzzed repeatedly. Text messages and calls trickled in from neighbors checking in. Some offered support. Others asked for details, curious to hear his side of the story. At work, Mark found himself distracted, thinking about the incident. He realized how small moments, like leaving a garage door open, could spiral into something much bigger. Later, that day, a neighbor stopped by Mark's house. A middle-aged man named Tom, friendly but cautious, smiled as he walked up the driveway. "Hey, Mark," he said. "I just wanted to say, I heard what happened. Hope you're doing okay." Mark shook his hand, grateful for the gesture. "Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind," Tom nodded. "Karen means well. She's just protective of her property." Mark sighed. "I get that. I just wish things hadn't gotten so tense." As the day wore on, the neighborhood seemed divided. Some residents stood firmly behind Karen, believing her instincts had kept them safe. Others sympathized with Mark, seeing the incident as a misunderstanding fueled by suspicion. The local community center buzzed with quiet conversations as the HOA board prepared for their next meeting. The topic was sure to come up, and many residents planned to attend. Karen spent the afternoon reviewing security camera footage from her house, hoping to find any sign of a real threat. The clips showed nothing unusual except Mark's garage door left slightly open and him working inside. No strangers, no suspicious activity. Still, the nagging feeling remained. Mark decided to take precautions. He scheduled a technician to fix the garage door the next day and considered installing additional lighting around his property. He wanted to avoid future misunderstandings and keep things peaceful. That evening, as the sun set, the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. The recent drama had unsettled the calm, and many residents found themselves thinking twice about their surroundings. Mark stood on his porch, looking across the street at Karen's house. She was already inside, curtains drawn tight. Both of them felt the invisible lines the incident had drawn, lines of suspicion, concern, and the need for trust. Neither was sure what the next day would bring, but both knew the neighborhood had changed, even if just a little. The days following the incident unfolded with a strange energy in the neighborhood. What had been a simple misunderstanding now simmered beneath the surface, creating an invisible tension that everyone seemed to feel, but few talked about openly. Mark fixed the garage door first thing Monday morning. The technician worked efficiently, adjusting the sensors so the door closed smoothly and completely every time. Mark appreciated the peace of mind the repair would bring, but he knew that fixing the door wouldn't instantly fix the neighborhood's mood. Word of the call to the police and the ensuing visit spread quickly through the community. At the local coffee shop, at morning walks, and even at the grocery store checkout, neighbors discussed the event in hushed tones. Some expressed sympathy for Karen's concern, while others felt the situation had been blown out of proportion at the same time, Mark noticed a subtle shift in how some neighbors looked at him. He caught a few sideways glances, whispered conversations that stopped as he approached, and an occasional hesitant nod instead of a warm greeting. It wasn't overt hostility, nothing like that, but it was enough to make him feel like an outsider, in a place he'd called home for years. Karen, too, felt the ripple effect. She wasn't used to being questioned or doubted. A part of her remained certain she had acted responsibly, protecting her property and the neighborhood's safety, but another part wrestled with guilt. Had she overreacted? Had she caused unnecessary trouble for Mark? The HOA board's upcoming monthly meeting promised to be more crowded than usual. The story had captured the community's attention, and many wanted to voice their opinions. On the evening of the meeting, the small community center filled quickly. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, but the atmosphere felt charged. Faces were familiar but tense, and the usual casual chatter was replaced by a serious hush. Karen arrived early, taking a seat near the front. She carried a folder with notes, security camera footage printed out, and a list of safety concerns. She was prepared to explain her perspective thoroughly. Mark arrived a few minutes later, greeted by a mix of nods and cautious looks. He took a seat across the room, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The HOA president, a middle-aged woman named Linda, called the meeting to order. After the usual announcements, she turned to the main topic of the evening. "We're here to discuss the recent events on Elm Street," Linda began. "There have been concerns about safety and communication within the neighborhood, and it's important we address them together." Karen stood first, her voice clear and steady. She shared what she had seen that night: the open garage, the figure moving inside, her quick call to the police. She emphasized her commitment to keeping the neighborhood safe and urged everyone to be vigilant. Some nodded in agreement. Others listened quietly, their expressions thoughtful. Then Mark spoke. He described his side of the story: his late-night project, the malfunctioning garage door, and the unexpected arrival of the police. He stressed that he respected Karen's concern but hoped the community could find a way to avoid similar misunderstandings in the future. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Linda opened the floor to comments and questions. Voices rose, some supportive, some frustrated. One neighbor suggested better communication channels for the neighborhood, like a group chat or regular updates. Another proposed installing security cameras at key points for everyone's peace of mind. Karen and Mark both nodded at these ideas, seeing potential paths forward. The meeting ended with a commitment from the board to explore new ways to improve communication and safety without jumping to conclusions. As the crowd dispersed, Karen and Mark found themselves standing near the exit, an awkward silence hanging between them. Karen took a deep breath. "I'm sorry if I caused you any trouble." Mark smiled faintly. "No harm done. Maybe this was just a wake-up call for all of us." They shook hands, a small but meaningful step toward understanding. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. The neighborhood was still, but the storm beneath the surface had calmed for now. The days following the HOA meeting unfolded with an unexpected calm. The charged atmosphere that had clung to the neighborhood began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious but hopeful sense of community. Karen and Mark both felt the shift, though their paths to reconciliation were different. Karen spent her mornings checking in with neighbors, opening small conversations about safety and trust. She brought flyers to the community center, outlining steps the neighborhood could take together, shared watch programs, neighborhood newsletters, and suggestions for lighting improvements. It was her way of showing she wanted to move forward. Mark, on his part, took the initiative to reach out as well. He sent a message to the neighborhood group chat that had been created since the meeting. In it, he thanked everyone for their support and urged open communication. "Let's look out for each other," he wrote. "No more jumping to conclusions." The message received several positive replies, a small but meaningful gesture. One afternoon, Mark noticed Karen working in her front yard. The tension that had been there just days ago seemed to have eased. He decided to stop by. "Hey, Karen," Mark called out, walking across the street. Karen looked up and smiled politely. "Hi, Mark. How are you?" "Better now." "Thought I'd see how you're doing." Karen nodded. "I'm good, still thinking about everything, but I want to help make things better." They talked for a few minutes about neighborhood plans and ideas for community events. It was the first real conversation they'd shared since the incident, a conversation that didn't revolve around suspicion or frustration. Meanwhile, the HOA board moved quickly on their promises. Motion-activated lights were installed on several streets, including Mark's and Karen's homes. A neighborhood watch program was launched, with volunteers signing up enthusiastically. During evening walks, neighbors greeted each other with more warmth. The sense of suspicion that had settled was slowly replaced by a shared responsibility, yet beneath the surface, some old habits remained. Karen found herself still occasionally glancing at the garage doors of her neighbors, a habit hard to break after years of vigilance. Mark, though more relaxed, remained mindful of the small things that could spark misunderstandings. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark found Karen on her porch again, this time with a tray of freshly baked cookies. Thought, "I'd try to make peace," Karen said with a small smile, offering him a plate. Mark chuckled, accepting a cookie. "Well, I can't say no to that." They sat on the porch steps, sharing stories about the neighborhood's past and hopes for the future. For the first time, the barriers between them felt less rigid. The neighborhood around them buzzed softly with life, kids playing, dogs barking, neighbors chatting. The incident that had rocked their community now seemed like a distant memory, a catalyst for change rather than conflict. As the evening grew darker, Karen and Mark agreed on one thing: the neighborhood was stronger when everyone felt seen and heard. And sometimes, even the sharpest misunderstandings could lead to unexpected friendships. The weeks following the incident marked a turning point for the neighborhood. What had started as suspicion and misunderstanding slowly evolved into a renewed sense of community and connection. Karen and Mark had become unlikely allies. Their awkward interactions had transformed into genuine conversations, and the trust between them, once fractured, was steadily rebuilding. One sunny Saturday morning, the neighborhood gathered for a block party organized by the HOA. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, picnic tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, and children's laughter filled the air. Karen and Mark stood side by side near the grill, chatting easily with neighbors who had once viewed them with skepticism. Their smiles were genuine, their banter light-hearted. "This feels like a fresh start," Karen said, handing Mark a plate of grilled vegetables. Mark nodded. "Definitely. I'm glad we got through all that. Makes you realize how important it is to communicate." Nearby, Linda, the HOA president, raised her glass for a toast. "To neighbors," she said, "and to looking out for each other with kindness and understanding." Glasses clinked and the crowd cheered. Later, as the sun began to dip low, Karen and Mark took a quiet walk through the neighborhood. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow on the familiar homes. They paused in front of Mark's driveway. The garage door stood closed, the quiet sentinel of a once tense moment now long past. "Funny how a simple garage door can cause so much trouble," Mark said with a chuckle. Karen smiled. "Yeah, but maybe it was what we needed, to shake things up a bit." They talked about their plans for the future. Karen hoped to start a neighborhood newsletter to keep everyone informed and connected. Mark wanted to organize occasional workshops on home maintenance and safety. Their ideas sparked enthusiasm, and they both knew these efforts would help foster a stronger, more trusting community. As they turned to head back home, Karen glanced up at the stars beginning to twinkle overhead. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Mark agreed. "And I think we're just getting started." The night was peaceful, filled with promise. In the end, what had seemed like a dramatic clash was really a story about people learning to listen, to understand, and to grow together. Karen and Mark had not only mended fences between neighbors, they had built new bridges, and that was the real beginning.